speak right now, and I was actually thinking about a more extended talk on tomorrow. But you know, it would be just impossible to say everything what I can say about the Ukrainian situation, because I was writing a lot about that, and many different problems and many different questions which are still unresolved. And but if trying to connect to the previous presentation about the Ukrainian identity, about Ukrainian nationalism, there are at least two things which continue to worry me. And first, there's a discourse on emerging Ukrainian civic nationalism. That what happened during Maidan was not actually so much radically nationalist, and it's in some dimensions it was not indeed. But what we've seen that the Ukrainian civic nationalism has arisen. Civic nationalism, which is not connected to any kind of like blood and land ideas, but which would include all the Ukrainians living in Ukraine. But I'm very much skeptical about this idea. To which, you know, in any way it is true, because what's actually emerged there, that it's not a civic nationalism, but it's a kind of like a victory of just one perception of Ukrainian identity, which actually existed in Ukraine, and Olga actually spoke about this as competition between pro-European Ukrainian identity and so-called Eastern Slavic, but I would call it an alternative Ukrainian identity, not actually connected to the Western Ukrainian version of it, but identity which was mostly growing from the history of Soviet Ukraine, where the history of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which was also Ukrainian, and which also, at least in some periods of time, was actually promoted Ukrainian culture, specifically in the 1920s. And this is a part of Ukrainian history, and precisely in this historical period that many of Ukrainians were actually starting to learn that they were Ukrainians, starting to understand that they were Ukrainian in the process, which by social scientists is described as like nationalism. And what we see now is actually excluding this part of Ukrainian history, this part of Ukrainian identity. So I wouldn't call it Ukrainian civic nationalism. It's something else. And actually, some of the Russian sociologists have conducted an extensive survey among the participants of Maidan and anti-Maidan in Ukraine. Just recently, they collected 150 interviews. And they're speaking precisely about this exclusivist dimension of Maidan discourse. That it was indeed that the people were indeed perceiving that almost all nations has arisen against Yanukovych, but at the same time they totally excluding those who didn't support them. And this is something else in civic nationalism. And the second thing is that the real role of the far-right Ukrainian nationalists in Maidan. I've written a lot about that, and I'm still participating in this debate, and I fully understand that this issue was instrumentalized by Russian media specifically, which were consciously exaggerating and even hysterically exaggerating the level of participation of the far-rights in Maidan and in the new Ukrainian government. But at the same time, I'm kind of really still really heavily opposing those who continue to whitewash Maidan and also continue to downplay the role of the far rights in these events and in the forthcoming events. And actually, we do possess systematic data on protest events during Maidan, and I was coordinating the team of kind of like 10 people who collected reports about every protest event during Maidan, and we are doing this project actually for 5 years already. And looking at this data, we indeed see that, for example, Svoboda Party, the major far-right party in Ukraine, was the most visible identified agent in Maidan protest events. Their participation was reported in at least 18% of all Maidan protests. And we actually tried to code every identified participant, organization, party, identified initiative, which was mentioned in the reports about the protest events. And the right sector, private sector, which was the most visible agent in the violent Maidan events. And Svoboda was on the second place. And of course, it's so Svoboda was more visible than Batyrshina party and the Yulia Tymoshenko party, but more visible than Vitaly Klitschko party, Udar, more visible than civic initiatives, more visible than the famous Auto-Maidan. And yeah, of course, there's a question that this is data gathered from media reports, and media are biased, and media do not report, they report selectively. But nevertheless, even if you interpret this data as just a visibility, which agents were just visible in the protest events during Maidan, nevertheless, this, the visibility itself, it has direct consequences. It influences on how the audience of media perceive what happened during Maidan. And the strong far-right participation, which was not invented by Russian media, but it was indeed there, that was one of the crucial factors which prevented Maidan to become a truly all-national movement against Yanukovych, and prevented a huge part of the society to support it, and in the end it laid down for actual objective internal ground for the war we see now in the eastern Ukraine. That would be two my things I would actually contribute, speaking about Ukrainian identity and nationalism.
It's working, it's okay. So I just, I also didn't prepare too much for today, because I'm going to take part in the same panel with Vladimir tomorrow. But I just want to comment that first thing that you can say that all the Ukrainian crisis, all this dramatic story of this year, it was somehow the very brutal rebirth of this power of identities itself. So it was a situation when not just this 1% of Ukrainian population who somehow actively support or participate in Maidan were involved in this process of constructing identities, but through the militarization of conflict, through the militarization of situation east of Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of people were forced to choose between the identities. So, and when I saw in the presentation these two definitions of two kinds of Ukrainian identity, like this ethnic Ukrainian and European, Ukrainian, and Eastern Slavic. So I just imagine how many people were forced to choose between these two identities in a violent way. So if Maidan, with all the contradictions that were mentioned by Vladimir, it was still open space for the choice of the opportunities. Later on, so many people, so many citizens of Ukraine were completely passive in the face of this choice between identities. And the second thing, according to it, that I also want to point is what happened with Russian media during this year. I think it can be a very impressive project to have such analysis of Russian media, like comparing like First Russian Channel, Live News, and Izvestia paper, for example. So in first, well, Ukrainians is something between wild animals, Hitler fascists, and I don't know, maniacs from Hollywood movies. Another is like the same, but more in the favor of maniacs, and in the third is more Hitlerist version. So it was a very impressive propagandistic offensive to the consciousness of the whole nation, whole Russian population, where the identity of Maidan was totally constructed from the top. And that was also something completely different from Ukrainian situation, and it was very much connected with this military political unity of the nation that emerged as the new Putin hegemonic project. So, like how to construct this unity, this national unity, this mythology of something 89 or 85 or whatever percent of Putin support in the situation when this support, when this idea of this support come only through the negation of the other and through the fear of any kind of instability, of any kind that something like Maidan can happen in Russia. So I also very far from such a simplistic explanation of the policy of the Russian state in the Ukrainian crisis, that it was only just because of fear of terrible dictator Putin, of possible color revolution in Ukraine. Of course, it's not too simplistic. There were more deeper reasons for the logic of the policy of the Russian state in this year. Of course, this logic was more complicated, but I think that even this moment when the like power was overthrown from below, and that was the image, the exact message that came from Maidan, despite all the domination of nationalism and so on. I think it was very important for immediate reaction of the Russian state and Russian propagandistic machine. I mean, that was very clear signal, and that was very strong impression. And I think this kind of image also play some role of the events that follow the Maidan.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to both of you for filling in, helping us out at such short notice. But I'd like to open to the floor. Has anybody got any questions, any contributions? I can hear you, I don't think they can.
I have a question whether with the word identity, isn't identity the thing which you have and you don't take? Because as long as you take in a certain moment and you choose between one and the other, it's already, that's not identity. I mean, that is identity, people are not conscious about it, that they have it. For example, I asked some weeks ago my Polish friends, I'm from Austria, because I was always convinced that the Polish people have a Slavic supranational identity. Then it turned out that nobody thought about it. It was a question nobody understood. But on the other hand, I think even people have the Slavic identity, but they don't spell it. It is coming out from life, the way of life you have, the way you are talking and so on. And this question of which identity to choose is maybe the wrong. We already think that this identity was built in this moment, but perhaps this is the problem of the whole Maidan story, that it was strange to everybody, and you had to decide in the political moment you met it. I don't know whether you understand what I mean. On the other hand, perhaps I choose the moment. I don't know nobody from the Ukraine. I'm only a normal consumer of newspapers, of reports, of TV reports, and so on. And I have to say, according to what you said, I have no idea really what really was going on there. Because I have a uniformed information from the West, from the Western media, from West Germany, from Austria and so on, which are 99% the same kind. They are identical. I have a feeling that the Polish newspapers, they sent to a very concrete opinion about this Western-styled range of Euromaidan. But I have no idea. Then I have this, what one can call a sort of propaganda from the Russian side, from Russia Today and so on. But I have no source of really to know what was going on there. I don't know whether I'm the only one, but perhaps, and this is really my problem.
I have been involved very much in the Yugoslav crisis, and I found at that moment, so that's the first remark, that identity, if that means a forced choice, a choice of in what state do you want do you prefer to live at a certain moment, it can change very rapidly in the period of crisis. So that's a first remark. The ambiguity of the discussion, if identity means the political choice in what state do you think it's the best for you to live in, to defend your dignity, your cultures, your history, many things. Well, second remark on ambiguity of vocabulary. Personally, I believe that we must distinguish national feelings, national rights, which are part of democratic issues, right of independence, sovereignty, and so on and so forth, and nationalism as an ideology against the other, with certain exclusive, but on the back of the others, and so on. And often when you are to come back on, for instance, what the first report, sorry I don't remember your name, what you described about the Polish, the Politica in particular, you were saying that there was in Politica two kind of description of identity: Ukrainian, European identity, or radical nationalism. And that reminds me the way Western European dominant layers were dealing with Yugoslav crisis at that time and Serbian issues at that time. Where if you had any national feelings in the Balkan, in Yugoslavia, you were barbarian, it was pejorative. So the only way to be civilized and recognized is to be European. So it's a way to use the identity European a little bit in a racist view. Either you are European or you are barbarian. Well, that's a comment. I want to know if you think that could be. And last remark, so then coming on what Volodymyr Ishenko said, I mean, my question is a little bit like Ilya perhaps said, that is the evolution. With the first remark I made, that is the evolution of feelings. During Maidan itself, I think the question of the Ukrainian state and even the national identity was fragile, still. But there was this vote in 1991, I mean, for independence. And still, even in the eastern region, I think, even if there were those kind of regional aspects, and even if there was also what you said about Soviet past in the identities and so on, but there was also a certain attachment to independent Ukraine, not only in the western part, I think, but this could change depending on the evolution of the conflict. And I had myself, and that's an open question that I wrote, I have, my English is, I'm becoming tired. I wrote in my articles question marks about what is the effect of the war, hybrid war. What is the effect of the Russian interventions in the way it was done, the Russian propaganda also, and what is the effect also of the Kiev government policy as anti-terrorist so-called operation in the East. And my question to you, I have the impression through articles I have read, I have of course no possibility to judge from outside, but some very recent articles that I read were saying that except in the two towns, Luhansk and Donetsk, except there is no more so sharp division between southeast Ukraine and the rest, western Ukraine, and more attachment to an independent Ukraine now. So it's a question that I'm raising to you.
I want to respond about your question about identity. As I said from the very beginning, it's quite risky to speak about identity at all, because when we are talking about identity in scholar meaning, and how it is researched, how it's explored by scholars, it's kind of something different, like we feel like people. That you said that identity is something that you have not to choose. It's something that it should be with you. Yes, in some kind I agree, but it has to deal with different types of identity. Sometimes you have to choose your identity, or your identity is constructed by external factors, by society, by politics, by the state you live in. And there are some types of identity which could be constructed or which is inherent to you. But what was in Euromaidan that you said that people had a challenge what to choose, and they were kind of forced to choose some identity. I don't think that they were forced. Like they were. I don't know how to say it, they were choosing among, not only between their identity, but between the rules of society they were living in, and they were choosing between values they want to cultivate. And people in Euromaidan, they were staying for some kind of values, and they were not staying for EU or NATO or some political and economical structures. You know, they were staying for some kind, as I presented it, for some kind of ideas and and values. So it's, I know it's sufficient answer. Yeah, and as for presenting, like if you are not European, you are a kind of barbar. It is the way it was presented in some articles, not in all articles in Polish news, in Polish weeklies. But as for me and as for reality in Ukrainian, of course, it is not so, because these people, but this is all these right-wing parties and right-wing structures participated in Euromaidan. It could not be like black and white, and it's not so.
Yeah, I'll respond to actually about the sources. If you would like to have a kind of more or less regular English language source, then I would recommend you the magazine which I'm also a part of the editorial board. This is Left East. It's posted on the criticattack.ro website and provides a platform for left view on the Eastern European events and analysis of the recent events, more theoretical articles as well. And during the last year, actually, the articles about Ukraine were the most read on our website. So, yeah, if you're looking for the English language source, this is something at least what exists. And responding to Katherine's question, you're right that these identities and attitudes are evolving. They are not static, they are changing. And it would be worth to remember why over 90% voted for Ukrainian independence in 1991. Ukrainian independence was very tightly connected actually to perceptions of the well-being, that people were actually aspiring for the better lives. And a huge vote, if I'm not mistaken, even in Crimea, it was over 50% that voted for Ukrainian independence in December 1991. Even in Crimea, where the actual majority was Russian, and where actually the majority, that's a whole different debate actually, how many people did support the Russian annexation, but nevertheless, a large part of people indeed supported it. And I believe it was over 50% as well. But then, very quickly, when the economic crisis started, the support for Ukrainian independence deteriorated sharply. And again, I'm quite, as a sociologist, I'm quite hesitant to speak about like majority, minority without actually seeing data. But as far as I recall from their service, where actually the people were asked about, do you support Ukrainian independence? Then for many years, in the 1990s, actually only minority would say that they would vote for Ukrainian independence if they were asked that in this question now. When the people's well-being went so drastically low and many people lost their jobs, lost the savings, and were forced to migrate or to change totally their profession, that was not something that they would support for. And of course now the Maidan victory, the war, they also making pressure on people's perceptions. And just yesterday, they published the most recent survey made by the kind of like reputable polls company, and for the first time they showed that majority of Ukrainians do support NATO integration. It was the first time actually, because even this year, even after the war started, it was still not the majority. It was growing. It was before 2015 it was something like 20%. In 2014 it became 30% and 40%. And now they reported about over 50% that support NATO. Over 60 or even 70% they support EU. And this is the result of this. And you are also right that you don't need to essentialize the southeastern part of Ukraine, because indeed Donbass and other regions, Odessa, for example, Kharkiv, they're different. But nevertheless, if you Donbass is definitely something standing separate from this larger part. But nevertheless, if you look at Odessa perceptions, Kharkiv perceptions as well, they are different from the rest of Ukraine. Not as extreme as Donbass, but nevertheless they still are roughly what could be said anti-Western and roughly pro-Russian. These are very like essentialist ideas. And nevertheless, the fact is that the voting turnout in 2014 elections, both presidential elections and parliamentary elections in southeastern regions was very, very low. But indeed, a huge part of the population which previously voted for the party of Regency, the Polish party, it just didn't come to this voting precincts. They chose not to vote, not to participate in the big politics. And now there's the question, who will represent these people? Because if they are not represented politically in the liberal democracy, they may choose another ways to influence the politics. And that's all, of course, that's a niche for pro-Russian forces, but that's also a niche for radical left forces that may work and try to engage and try to politicize these people and to try to turn them onto the social reform and not to the geopolitical nationalist struggle.
You can say something, we have time, so.
You want the microphone?
Because I have still this problem with this identification, and I think if we speak that whether Ukraine is a real state and has its identity, it is very important. Because what you said, I think, is rather a political opinion, a political attitude. But a political attitude is something else than identity. Identity, I think, from my feeling, is much deeper. I have to tell you, for 30 years I tried to get rid of my Austrian identity, because I didn't want to like this country, until I found that this is not possible. Whether you want it or you don't want it, you have it. You have it unconsciously, and then I tried to get a positive attitude towards my, I don't know how to name it, I think it's an identity. The way I speak, the way I think, the way I hear, the way I talk to people, and so on. So this is much deeper. Maybe there is a difference whether we name identity as something which is conscious, what I can spell to say I have it, or whether it's something I have in my soul, in my heart, in my body, in I don't know where, my brain. And independently from my will, it is existing in that myself. And I think if there should be an outcome of this discussion about what we speak. When the next time we are asked whether Ukraine is really a country with an identity, or whether it is not. Up to now, I don't know. Because there are different points of opinion about it. I think we should make a difference between political opinion, between certain, for example, I can tell you, before the Anschluss of Austria, there was a referendum done in '38, and only 30% of the people wanted Austria to join Germany. And 70% wanted to have Austria as an own state. Shortly after that, I think it was half a year later, when the Germans already entered, it was the other way around. 90% agreed with joining Austria with the Germans, and only 10% or 5% they didn't agree. But there was no change of identity at this time. It was just a change of a daily political opinion they had. But you cannot name it as an identity. I think we should be more serious and more exact about what we are speaking about. Thank you.
This is not me who said about who named this identity. Identity, you are talking about identity in some philosophical and ontological point of view, but there is a huge theory of identity. And identity is very complex. It's a complex of notions and approaches, how it is researched and so on. And it comes from psychology and then developed in political science, sociology, and so on. There are different approaches and kind of how to research identity and what can be named identity. And it's not my imagination that I called it that Ukrainian wanted to, I don't know, they wanted to join the European Union, and so they have supranational European identity. I was based on the analysis of some amount of scholarly literature. That's not my point of view, but I will take into consideration your remarks. Thank you very much. It's really profound.
It wasn't meant against you, what you say, it's just a reflection.
Okay. Despite living in Poland for nearly 2 decades, my British identity tells me we should continue this conversation in the pub. And therefore I recommend that we finish today. I thank you. There were many technical difficulties. I'd like to thank Oliver for their interesting presentation and comments, and also Vladimir and Ilya for standing in and doing a sterling job.